Welcome to the DB Show. Today we have Mr. Abhinav joining us from Rain Matter Foundation. Mr. Abhinav helps people figure out their climate journeys. As an icebreaker, if your career had a tagline, what would it be?
This doesn't seem normal.
So now I think that's quite interesting and also I think perfect in how your career transition has been so far. So what was the most unexpected left turn in your journey?
I think it was the start of my journey. It was when I quit corporate law, I think 4 months into it. And I was like, this definitely isn't for me. So it's time to figure what is.
So what was your this wasn't for me, like what triggered your this wasn't for me moment, or was it like a slow realization that built upon certain experiences?
So for me, it was more like I never thought I'd be a corporate lawyer. It was final year of law school and I used to in fact make fun of people who join corporate law. But then peer pressure got to me. I didn't know where I was headed. Everybody worked really hard through law school, so they knew what they wanted to do. I didn't. And my favorite word, serendipity, keeps happening. But it happened so that we had a law firm that was dealing in technology, media and telecommunications law that reached out for trainees. And I thought to myself, if there's any sort of law that I can do, it's technology, media and telecommunications. That's where I was like, okay, let's do this traineeship. We don't know what will come out of it. So I took it up. I got the traineeship, and so this was my last couple of months of my final year, where I would do 9 to 11 in college, 1 to 10 in the night at the law firm.
Oh, with you.
And during this time, I got exposure to what the world of corporate law can do, and access to people, networks, money, right? I think while as a final year law student, I was also organizing parties, doing a bunch of interesting events, right? So my law firm boss is like, I don't know how great a lawyer you'll be, but you're extremely enterprising. So he's like, why don't you throw a party? So I did like those fun stuff. Ultimately, I got to PPO.
Yeah, okay.
And everybody's quite surprised because I never studied through law school. My law firm boss also, who gave me the job, was like, you might not make a great lawyer, but you're so enterprising, you can sell ice to an Eskimo. So just for that, I want to take a bet on you. So that's sort of how it began. But soon enough, I realized that I was working 18-hour days, which was not me. And I didn't never really define who I was or was anything that I really enjoyed. So while I put in the effort, I don't think I was really good at being a lawyer either. So I didn't want to spend the rest of my life to wake up to a realization 15 years later saying my life went by me and I didn't make this shift when I could. So then I was like, you know what, maybe now's the time. If I'm not feeling happy now, it's not like it's going to change in a year. So 4 months later, I was like, okay, maybe this is not for me. Little rash move in my opinion now in hindsight, but I think it sort of was the foundation stone of what became the next decade of my life, which it's what I'm living through today.
Now, your career has spanned a lot of things, like you said. What's the common thread connecting all of what you've done so far?
I don't know if there is one common thread, but now when I look back at it in hindsight, a lot of them make sense as to why they happen when they happen. Why I worked in corporate law and why it didn't work out was a reason for me to discover what I wanted to do. Why I went and worked and did my fellowship was now in hindsight what I learned really about myself. I think the common thread, if I was to think about that, sort of brought my entire life together is so I watched a video a couple of years back which said that your 20s are for you to discover 3 things about yourself: your understanding of money, your understanding of self, and understanding of time, right? And over my 20s, I'm turning 30 in a month, I did just that. To understand myself, I'm somebody who practices Vipassana meditation. It was a very pivotal moment in my life. Understanding of money has gone from being raised in a capitalistic family to then, during my fellowship days, I became a full socialist, almost joined the Communist Party of India. to then coming back and now being part of a capitalistic organization again, but with an impact lens. So my understanding of money has gone through different shapes and form. But I realized one thing during my fellowship, that in order to create change at scale, you need capital. So that was a big takeaway from money. So today, the role of money in my life is very different from what it was maybe when I was younger. And I was like 17, 18, I used to tell my friends I want to be a billionaire. I'm like, being a millionaire is overrated, I want to be a billionaire. But it was only later in my life that I started to understand that why did I want to be a billionaire? So I used to play hypotheticals in my head. And I used to be like, okay, let's assume you have $1 billion in your account today. What would you do differently? I like cars. I would have bought a few cars, bikes, yachts, islands, whatever. But I asked myself, would I be content at the end of it? And the answer was no. So that's when the switch became to more impact and wanting to give back in some way, from just wanting to make a lot of money. I became a lawyer to make a lot of money, but now none of that makes sense to me anymore. Understanding of self also, there's been a lot of self-discovery over these years. That's been important. Time is something that I am now of essence understanding that what I thought at one point didn't matter. Like, I didn't really factor in time when I was going through this journey. But now in hindsight, things could have been placed a lot more. Like, I could have been more strategic about things I did. I spent too many years just being stuck in my own head and not acting. So, like, building an action bias and the need for it is what has changed now. So I think these three things sort of threaded my entire journey together. And now, as I keep reading more and learning more, I realize that what I want from my life and my career and my journey is three things, right? You look for money, purpose, and variety. That's the core of everything that I want to do. And serendipitously, it all came together in my most recent role. Right? All the learnings from everything that I did in the past, just, they say full circle moments, like I've had too many of those.
Yeah, that I think that quite beautifully answers, right? So, like you said, you just summed up what an entire, like, or any human would need: money, purpose, and variety. I think that's what we all like look for unknowingly or knowingly with purpose. And like you said, like to just add upon what you said as well, something that connects all of this, I think, is your willingness to put yourself out there and try different things and see what works out for you. And I think that experimentation in itself has taught you so much, right? And just a follow-up question on what you said. So do you have like this mental frameworks that you learned or you picked up from somebody that helps you make such strategic decisions now about your career on how you approach things?
I honestly don't think it's too strategic.
Okay.
It's a lot of things that just happen.
Okay.
Right? If you would have asked me 10 years ago, would I be working with Siruda? Not a chance. Right? There were ideas, and I'm not a religious person, but I believe in the power of the universe. So I really manifest everything that comes into my life. So I have manifested versions of what this is before, but it was never, it came to me in a different form, right? I didn't think I would be working in investing with Rain Matter. I thought it would be with the 10, 15 other investment funds that I'd applied to with the hope of like getting started in investing, right? Because you think of like this vision of life or afterlife of, I was like, I've worked as a lawyer with startups. I worked in a startup. And then I was like, for the trifecta, I want to work in investing to fully understand the entrepreneurship ecosystem, right? So I put seeds of this in the universe. It's just that it came to me in a different form. And I'm very grateful for the form that a lot of these take. But I wouldn't say I'm necessarily strategic about this. But to your earlier point about experimentation, that's something that I have always been very clear about. I have been extremely shameless throughout my career. And I don't even know if I can call it a career, but it is, I keep telling people what I lack in work experience, I make up for in life experiences. So this need for experimentation was this kida I had that anything and everything that I once wanted to do, I wanted to see it through, right? So the curiosity to explore was what drove me to doing a lot of things, right? Because I'm also very shameless when it comes to opportunities. I'm not afraid to ask. So I think a lot of what led to where I have gotten in my life is because I just kept asking, right? And I didn't take no for an answer. I was like, in any format, shape, form, I want to do what I want to do.
I think that's something I've heard by a lot of our guests on the podcast as well, and also people outside, right? Is to be shameless, like go out there, ask for what you want. That's like the first step of even getting like what you envisioned or what you wanted, right? So, how has this life experiences, and what are the top things that have taught you and shaped you throughout your career as a journey?
Off the top of my head, right? Like one thing that came to me very late in my life, but is something that's been very influential in me thinking of decision making is poker as a game.
Okay.
Um, so poker has been like my biggest teacher. Two things actually, poker and travel. Um, they have influenced and been my biggest teachers in all of my life, not just limited to my career. But what a poker table teaches you is the true character of a person. Like I've heard this before, but if I was to hire people, I'd want to hire them on a poker table because when your chips are down and you're hard in luck, uh, the true character of a person stands out, and that's exactly what a poker table has taught me. Is that people at their weakest, how they behave, is what makes you or breaks you, right? And second is travel. I started traveling solo from when I was 15. Started properly backpacking through college. Did like some really long backpacking trips. So I was going to drop out of law school in 2015, 16. Third year of college. I was like, hey, law is not for me. I realized this, and maybe it's time I don't waste my life away and drop out. And my parents, as supportive as they've always been, they were like, listen, don't drop out. Have a degree at least that you can fall back on. So my dad was of the opinion that why don't you go on an internship or a break? And at this point, I was working with an organization called ISEC. So through ISEC, when I was working, I said, hey, maybe before I leave ISEC, I want to go on an exchange program. So 2015 was when I went to Vietnam. No idea of where life was going to take me or where I was headed, but it was a very pivotal moment in this journey of my life because it was a point when I was clueless in life, didn't know where I was headed, what I was going to do. Landed in Vietnam in a strange country. This is 2015. A lot of people weren't traveling to Vietnam. My project that I was supposed to go and work on through ISEC fell through. Everything that could go wrong sort of went wrong. But that sort of became the stepping stone in me stepping up. Because the best option for me to do was projects fallen through, don't know anybody, should head back to my country, right? I was like, no, I need this break. I'll make the most of what I can. So I got up one night, got out of my bed, went downstairs, spoke to a person from a strange country, and I said, hey, what's up, where are you from? And that was the start of 45 days of making friends from over 100 countries. Right? So I was living in Ho Chi Minh City, experiencing everything that I did. And it became like my biggest teacher. Right? I got a project where I was working with the locals. That was actually my first climate project. Was in Vietnam. I was working with school students on educating them on climate change. And so these two, in a nutshell, are like huge teachers for me. Not conventional, but have taught me exponentially about what I know about life and my career and everything else.
I think funny how I've also been a part of ISIC, and that's how I think I've also ended up here as a part of their outreach, like their product team, and then did marketing there, and then somehow I think those connected dots ended up here in marketing as well. So speaking of like travel and all these career, this thing, right? So that is not something our Indian parents readily agree, or not something that they readily support, Right. So how did you go about convincing your parents, and how do you go about like just accepting that and taking that leap of faith, right? It's very scary. Like you're not following a particular course or a degree, and you're not having this 5 year, 10 year career plan, because that is something that makes a lot of people anxious. Oh, hey, I don't have a degree, I don't have a career plan. That's something very, I think, like stepping into the unknown and like believing in yourself that, oh, hey, I'll just figure it out, is I think is a separate talent or this thing in itself. So how do you build that, and how did that kind of like benefit you right now?
So my parents have been super supportive, have been like my biggest cheerleaders through all of this. Like my dad to this date has never asked me what grades I got in school. It was always about did you pass? And they always cared about life experiences. So my dad was the one who instilled the kid of traveling in me and my sister. So they were very supportive. But I think over the journey of the last 10 years, I think they also ran out of patience at some point, right? Because they were constantly questioned about what is your son do? We don't understand it. One day he's in Bangalore, next day he's in Goa, next day he's in Mumbai. What is he up to, right? He's not had a traditional career. And my mother, growing up in a Fauji household, always saw structure as something that gave her a lot of peace. And so for her, it was very unsettling. For my dad being an entrepreneur, it was still easier for him to make peace with it. But for my mom, it was very unsettling. So till I think maybe Zerodha, she was always on edge. And for her also, when Zerodha happened, it was more around finally he's settling down, right? And for me, settling down was like a gali growing up. I was like, I never want to settle. Like settling down is for normal people. I don't want to settle down. But yeah, I think now my parents are a little more at peace, but I've given them a hard time. So many sleepless nights. My mother's extremely religious, so too many pujas done for me to get a job. But now I think they're happy at where I am, because over the journey, there were a lot of extremely low moments where I was like, is this really worth it? Right? I often use this phrase saying, breaking trail is often a lone calling. And so I'd written a letter to my parents 4 or 5 years ago saying, I'm done climbing the career ladder to nowhere. I really want to help my planet heal because that's something I really care about. And I don't want to wake up 30 years later and realize that I've not done my bit. So they, even through all those moments, tried to be supportive and really be there for me. But I think the greatest lesson came from my sister's friend around parents and how they understand your journey. She told me that it's not your journey to explain to your parents about your journey. It's your parents' journey to understand your journey. So stop trying. They will understand on their course. You've got to follow your path because it's enough uncertainty here. Having to live through that uncertainty of what your parents will go through is a whole other beast. So for anybody out there, maybe I lucked out with my parents. But it was not easy, even for them, to understand what a non-traditional career can look like. Because I didn't take money from anybody. I didn't have a job. They didn't know what I was up to, right? They were just worried. My parents have at some point even like wondered if I was selling drugs because they're like, how is he making money? Right? How is he surviving? But I think they later realized that I'm somebody who's so low maintenance that I could survive on anything. So yeah, I think support system, I did get lucky, A1 support system, but it's not been an easy journey.
So that was actually one of my like follow-up questions, right? How rewarding has this journey been of wanting to explore and, going off beat on rather than having a traditional career? So how rewarding has it been? And do you think that's something that people should try out, venture out and take so many risks? And do you think has it all, like, have you reaped all the benefits or fruits of it? So that was like my follow-up question. Do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing about exploring and doing what I did, right? So law school ended in 2018, we're in 2025. It's been 7 years of just doing random things. Okay, let's discount 2 years that I've been in Siroda. But before that, it was, I did anything and everything that my 15-year-old self wanted to do, right? And it's a very rewarding journey in that sense that I wanted to work on a film set always. It was like this key in me because I love cinema. My best friend was debuting in his movie. I mean, I told the director, I'll be free labor on set. Take me, let me do whatever, right? Because I just wanted to learn. It came from a place of, I put myself in places where I'm like, there is enough time to earn money. Today, I just want to experiment, right? So, working on the film was one such example. Um, a bunch of my friends were musicians in college, said they wanted to make music again and publish the music they made in college. And they said, we need help with social media. You seem to be very active on Instagram. Do you want to help out? So I did marketing for musicians as another experiment in my life. I started a social enterprise during COVID. There was a PPE shortage in the country. I didn't want to sit at home. The lockdown is happening. So somebody said, somebody's open source designs. Do you want to go and make these face shields? So me and 10 of my high school friends, this from the 6th grade, were like, let's go make face shields. And before we knew it, we were the largest concerted effort to make face shields in the country during the lockdown.
Yes.
So like Cambridge picked us up as a case study for frugal innovation during the pandemic. A lot of these things, these are some instances, including me wanting to go and work in a restaurant, right? I did all of this because I wanted to never live with the regret of not having tried something, right? To this date, it's the same Kira that I have, that I always want a variety. I want to keep challenging myself, putting myself in new instances. And this, my life journey for most, can be extremely unsettling, right? So I wouldn't say this is for everybody. But if you have the hunger to explore and you want to get out of your comfort zone and like you find comfort in the uncertainty in life, then I definitely would recommend it. Because now when we look back at it, like Nitin says this thing that I find very cool. He's like, when things go your way, you're called genius, right? When things don't go your way, you're called a fool. So there were so many instances that if none of this paid out and ended up in a job where I'm happy and I enjoy what I'm doing, it wouldn't have made sense, right? Like if none of this worked out and everything just went belly up, I can't justify it to anybody, right? And I was at the cusp of giving up. When I was in Goa, I was like, this is going nowhere. I've done too many years of experimentation, but this is leading to nothing. I had maybe 3,000 rupees in my account when I joined Zerodha. So it was the last nail in the coffin. I was like, this has to happen, right? So it's been fun, it's been rewarding. And yes, I had the support of my family. And would I change anything about it? No. But would I recommend it for everybody to do it? Probably not. Because I don't want to take responsibility for people's lives. But
That's there, right? So all this is like very thrilling and very exciting and absolutely cool. That is something that I totally resonate with. Like as a person, I'd want to try out every single thing before I want to fixate and say, hey, next 30 years of my life, this is what I want to be working on. At least as a person, for me, I can't like fix on something like that. Oh, there's so many things to do out there and I want to try a bit of everything. So that's how I resonated with. But the anxiety of not having a proper career really gets to me. So I was about to ask, how did you cope up with those really low moments? And like that has to have something where you were able to pull off that 7 years of experimentation is like no joke, right? So how did you put up with that? And what like did you have frameworks or strategies or something that you learned from people? How do you manage that transitioning periods and the low points of those transitioning periods?
so I think for me, right, like off the top of my head, it's mostly mental resilience. Like I'm properly cuckoo. Like I never let it get to me where I'm like, I'm going to see this through. And I have some unwavering, stupid self-belief, right, that I'll figure it out. And this didn't come from anybody, but it was, I think, maybe childhood experiences. Everything that led up to this point that I was like, I am the only one who can have my own back. So I have to have my back, right? So that was one thing that led to it. But to that question, right, there are different instances and points in my life that something sort of made sense. Like every time I thought I was losing my mind in those low days of I think I should give up, there are moments that either it's people or it's books or it's TED Talks or if it's podcasts where you see stories of others who've done it, and it sort of gives you some amount of hope to continue to do it, right? For example, there's a very interesting TED Talk that changed my life. In fact, two of them. One of it was something called Why Some of Us Don't Have One True Calling, right? It's by this lady called Emily Wapnick. And she talks about people like me who jump into careers, get really excited, and then just burn out and then move on to the next thing, right? And I thought I was abnormal for the longest time. I was like, why can't I stick to one thing? And that's something everybody around me also questioned, right? My parents would be like, why can't you just pick one thing and see it through? But when I heard that TED Talk, I was like, okay, there are others like me. Emily calls us multi-potentialites, right? But it sort of gave me hope that, hey, you're not alone. And then I had friends also who were in the discovery period of life, who also were clueless, didn't know where they were going. We sort of gravitated closer together because we were equally clueless. And the judgment of people didn't exist, right? Because when you're not doing anything, your lowest points, everybody around you is like, what next? Right? And all of them become your biggest critiques during that time. And I had this unwavering self-belief, but to be also going back to that point around my family, right? Like I would sit down with my mom and she would be like, Abhi, don't tell me it doesn't bother you that you see your friends who've gone to law school with you, who have those corporate law firm jobs, earning great money. Doesn't it bother you a little bit? And I said, Mom, all of them are having 2x jumps in life. I want a 10x jump in life. Right? And I'm like, I will get a 10x jump in life. And she never understood it. Right? But she's being the cheerleader that she is for me. She would just be like, yeah, maybe you have it all figured out. But during those days, it was cheesily put apna time aayega. So I would be relentless that it's just a matter of time. So even with my friends today who are in the phase of discovery, having really low days, I keep saying this. I'm like, you need one win. And everybody's time will come. You just need to stick around for long enough and wave through those or sort of sail through those really uncertain days. Because for every bad day, there's one good day. Right? So that's sort of what has kept me through. I've never given it this deeper thought before, but yeah.
I really believe, hopefully, that is true, that every bad day also has a equally good day. Because I think a lot of us, including half our audience who are BBA students as well, right? They're all from different walks of life. So we also have 40 years old, we also have 17-year-olds. So they're like people from all age groups and from different walks of life, different degrees as well, pursuing this as a secondary program. And they're all trying to figure out what best they can do next and how they go about this. And I think the story, like, just purely is super comforting, at least to me. It's like, okay, now you can still do it. There is still time. And like you said, apna time aayega. So that is something I think it's nice to hear. I think your career path is quite a proof that, right, that it's exploration is not just like a weakness, but it's like a pure strength. It's a test of your resilience. But looking back, do you think you would have done something differently?
No, I often I hear this that people say they wouldn't, and I sort of agree with it because a lot of it has a lot to do with serendipity. Had I not been at a certain place at a certain time, a lot of what happened in my life wouldn't have happened because some of them are just freak incidents, right? Like I couldn't have planned that I would have noticed a Zerodha listing on some job board where I was trying to upskill myself for something completely different. Okay. I was, like I had mentioned before, then I found the Zerodha listing through GrowthX. I did the GrowthX course to work in Web3. It had nothing to do with impact investing or working in a philanthropy or any of it. Right? The goal there was I need to make myself skilled again to re-enter the workforce after many years. And life just led me here. So could I have predicted that if I have changed any bit of it in the past? Probably not. But I think one thing that in hindsight I would have done differently maybe is would have been a little kinder to myself. Um, I have not been the kindest person to myself, and I've been my biggest critique, right? And in this pursuit of always trying to do stuff out on my own and be like this lone warrior, um, I missed out on opportunities to sort of catapult me further with a little bit of help. Right? There've been times that people have lent out her hand, and I was like, no, I don't need it. I will make it out on my own. Uh, Maybe it's ego, maybe it's pride, but if I could go back and change that, A, being easier on myself, and two is just like hoping that I would have taken those moments of like help.
There's so much pressure, right, to have it all figured out in life. And from your journey, what's your take on it? And how do you think people who want to at least have it all figured out and are stuck somewhere in their journey of difficulty in having a vision for their future, or like seeing, not able to see through what they've like planned their current life like 10 years ago? What's your take on all of this and the whole?
So I think to answer this, I'm going to quote another TED talk, which changed my life. It's called The Quarter Life Crisis by this guy called Smiley. So he talks about how, when I first took my law firm job, I thought I had it all figured out. I had my own house in Kormangla. I was earning pretty well. Everything was comfortable. I was working in a good law firm. So in my head, was like I sort of had made it, right? And I think why I quote that podcast is that TED talk is because I don't think anybody has anything figured out. This idea or the pressure to settle down and find the true calling, I think is a little overdone, because I don't think anybody has. And if my life is testament to anything, and if it's journeys of people that I've seen, people are always unlearning and relearning late into their life. What they felt like was settling down or having it figured out at one point in their life could lead to something completely different at a different stage in their life, right? So I used to face a lot of pressure at home to settle down and find one thing and stick to something. I don't believe in that. Like even now, when the assumption at home is that I sort of settled in, I'm like, no, I don't think I'm still settled in. And oftentimes, where I am today is what I thought would always be my ceiling. But a friend said something so beautiful. She said, what was once your ceiling is now your floor. Right? So, have I figured it out even today? No. I think life in itself is like a constant journey of figuring what works for you. It's also what you prioritize at different stages in your life, right? Like, some people really prioritize having a family, being there with the family, being happy. Some are just like, I want to make all the money in the world. So none of our journeys are similar at all. There isn't a one size fits all for any of this. So yeah, my answer to that is there is no really real figuring it out. But for the viewers, definitely recommend Quarter Life Crisis, because it talks about having purpose, finding people who believe in your vision, right? That's been huge too. In this process of trying to figure it out and find your way, you need to find people who believe in your journey. And otherwise, doing it all by yourself becomes extremely difficult.
I think like you said, like the one of the podcasts where you quoted in where you said they call it multi-potentialist. I think interestingly that has become a lot more common, right, than we think it is. Like a lot of people have this multidisciplinary career. Do you think such multidisciplinary careers are now shaping the workforce now that you work across like startups, sectors, corporate, and now into one of the investment banking firms and now a foundation, and like you've worked across a lot of places, right? Do you think such multidisciplinary careers are now shaping the workforce as such?
From whatever I've noticed, not with working with a fund or working with Rainmatter Foundation, it's more around the trends that I'm noticing in just careers in general, right? Like, finally, generalist roles have a stage, right? And for once, it's okay not being a specialist. So that's definitely needed. And I think, like Emily Wapnick puts it, generalists greatly complement specialists. So there is a space for both to coexist. And yes, some people know from the day they're born what they want to do in their life, and some of us don't. But having varied careers and dimensions to it brings like a vast amount of experience in just understanding different problem statements. We bring different approaches, right? So I am seeing a change. I am seeing a lot more generalist roles. Even in startups, founders' office roles have become so coveted, right? Because people want to be able to learn in different aspects of roles. And I think that's only the trend going forward. If we look at how people are joining different roles, it's less around what you studied anymore and more around what you're willing to do. If I look at like natural career of a lot of people, it's because they have been willing to experiment, explore, try different things, and bring all that vast experience into their current roles. So yeah, I definitely see that trend growing.
I think also there's always this debate of generalists versus specialists, right? Who makes it to the top? What do you think, like, really, who succeeds in life? Is it being a specialist or is it being a generalist? And what's your take on that?
So I'm obviously team generalist because I'm a generalist. Uh, but I really don't think it's a either or. It's just basically how you build, right? So if you're not built to be a generalist, I can't force you to be a generalist, right? But I think both have merits and both have demerits also. Um, Sometimes being a specialist, you can become extremely myopic and not see the big picture. So you need generalists to give you like the whole larger puzzle of what can be. So yeah, I can't pick either or, but I'm more leaning towards team generalist because I'm one.
Okay, like working with, I think, one of the most influential people, right, at least for this generation, with the Kamath brothers. And what has that experience taught you? And again, touching a little upon generalists and specialists, how would you categorize them? Are they generalists or specialists? And how's your team like?
For me, when I found this role, my whole core thing was I want to work with Nitin. So I work with Nitin, not with Nikhil as much.
Yeah.
But they say don't meet your heroes because they'll disappoint you. Nitin's not disappointed me yet. The whole team dynamic, and I in fact was reflecting on this very recently on what I've learned from some of the most influential people that I've interacted with in the last 2 years is one, they're extremely curious. Correct. I have never heard Nitin give gyan about what he has built and how he is better and he's done things differently. He's just been very curious about just learning and understanding things better. So that's one thing that makes them amazing at what they do. And two is they don't take themselves too seriously,
Okay.
which I find so beautiful. I always thought that people who sort of quote unquote make it in life sort of are so stuck in their head. But that's not been the case with a lot of them, especially Nitin. I'm a little fanboy, so maybe a little bit biased, but he's so approachable and so accessible, and so is the entire team, right? I think even the people who've worked with him for so many years carry the same idea and personas. None of them take themselves seriously enough. Everybody tries to be the best at what they do. I don't know if I'm best placed to even categorize them as generalist or specialist, but I think Nitin is somebody who, while is a specialist in broking, is a generalist in other domains in his life, right? Nobody understands broking better than he does, but every other aspect, like each startup that we invest in, Nitin is so personally invested in their journey, right? I think of now, while I'm not actively investing for Rainmatter, but in the 2 years that I did, it was my real life MBA, right? It was the curiosity with which we talk to every company, it's like the greatest lesson that anybody can get, right? You have some of the greatest minds in this country explaining concepts that they're deeply passionate about, and you just get to listen in. I used to often feel like an imposter almost, saying, what makes me sit here and evaluate these startups? Because they know so much more than I do. But I think what works is just staying extremely curious and learning as much as you can. And I've seen the same thing with these people. And also one last piece around Nitin and how he leads his team, right? He leads by example. It's often overstated that you need to lead by example, but in every walk of life, one is leading by example in business, but one is leading by example in fitness. When he says, hey, we should all work towards being healthier, he leads by example, right? He's probably the fittest man I know. So before Siroda, I always told myself I'll work out and I'll get fit. Last 2 years, seeing him every day in the office, I'd be like, oh my God, I need to show up at the gym. Because he's not made any excuses for not showing up. So what's your excuse?
I think that's also a part of your work culture, right? To be as fit as possible. And I believe you also get incentives for working out and sticking to your work goals. That is something Nitin Kamath recently shared in one of his talks here in Bangalore. So I was like very fascinated. Oh, that's a very cool company culture. That's not something I've heard or come across that often.
Yeah,
So I
that
think
is very cool. I didn't start getting fit because of just the health challenge. The health challenge is a great incentive. But it's less rigid now. It's a lot more just trying to motivate people. I think a lot of times it gets misconstrued in media as to, Zerodha gets its employees to work really hard to get fit. But it's more just trying to get people to live healthier lives.
no, I think I didn't know the media aspect of it, but just to think that there's an incentive and the company really cares about their fitness and their overall health is, I think, that's really cool. Like not just on papers, but like they actually do care about it personally is something that I think it's really cool, at least in terms of workplace culture. Like to wrap up this part of like the segment, right? And before we move to another very interesting part that I'm personally interested in, what are the top three things that you've learned in your last 2 years of your career with Zerodha and Rainmatter Foundation?
What I alluded to before, don't take yourself seriously. That's something I'm actively trying. And I think huge thing. 2 is just remain curious. And 3, don't focus on the outcomes. I think things will come to you when they're meant to come to you. Right? When I joined or came into this organization, I didn't know why I was here. I came as this hippie who lived in Goa saying, I need a chance at life. Right? And they were kind enough that they took a bet on me. But for me, everything that transpired from there was just serendipity. I was willing to put myself in places where I was curious enough. Right? So, yeah, I think to recap, it's 1, don't take yourself seriously. 2, remain curious. And 3, don't chase outcomes. Like it's not behind that dollar figure or that rupee figure at the end of the day. There's so much more to it.
I think that's very, that perspective, I think it comes with a lot of experience. And I think at least when you begin out, like you said, as a 17-year-old, you wanted to be a billionaire, right? So I think a lot of them also are like, hey, I just want to get rich, dude. That's like my goal and stuff. But I think that sort of perspective or the mindset that you have right now comes with a lot of experience and meeting with people and chasing what you think could bring you real purpose and variety, like to quote back on what you said. So I think that comes with an experience, but it's nice to have a forward from somebody who's like lived through that. So how did you get started with career and climate?
So the story of me getting into climate is actually very interesting. So I mentioned about doing that internship in Vietnam in 2015. That was sort of the seed. So there was a curiosity to work in climate, but I never thought of it as a real career back then. Post my fellowship, I'd spent some time on the ground. It was during Goa when I think the urge to want to do something in climate came back. It was like I fell in love with where I was living. I was living in a 120-year-old Portuguese villa in the middle of nowhere. Would get to see a lot of beautiful birds. And it was just very, very nice. And just the thought of not having this anymore was scary for me, right? And oftentimes when I ask people about what their early influences in climate were for them, it's different for different people. But for me, it started with wildlife photography, right? So those were the seeds. It so happened that there was this curiosity to work in climate, and I happened to meet somebody at a wedding in Hyderabad. And I said, hey, what do you do for a living? And he said, I work in climate. I got really intrigued, and I was like, hey, what does that even mean? What does your day-to-day look like? We had a great conversation, and then I forgot to take his number that night. And so we never spoke again. So somewhere there was a thought that just kept crossing my mind saying, I want to work in climate, but I don't know how to do it. So then whatever was at the top of it, I would apply to those. So whatever I saw on LinkedIn, was one called Climate Collectives. So I heard about investment funds like VC funds like Amana Capital and all of those which were doing climate work. So I thought maybe this would be my segue into climate. None of those happened. I happened to again meet the same person who I met in Hyderabad, coincidentally again in Goa. And this time he was doing a course on climate, where there is a tool that was created by MIT called En-ROADS, and he was giving a workshop on that. And I again reconnected with him and I said, do you remember me from so-and-so day? I happened to see Rain Matter Foundation in this job board for GrowthX. What is your take on this organization? And then he was like, it's run by this man called Samir Sisodia. If there is anybody who should be your starting point to discover anything in climate, it should be him. Like he'll give you like a bird's eye view of the entire ecosystem. And at that point, I didn't know much about grants or any of that. But my earlier learnings from the fellowship came back, right? Like I said, that in order to create change at scale, you need capital. So working at an organization like Rain Matter Foundation was more around how do you allocate resources towards solving these larger problems, right? So today we don't like being called a grant-making organization, but when we started out, it was more around giving grants to folks. Now we think of ourselves more like an organization trying to solve the climate problem, and funding is one tool that we use in our arsenal, right? So while that was happening, Rain Matter happened, I got into grants, started figuring out what grants were. And that was slowly my low touch point to climate. I said, okay, now I work in climate. What does this even mean? And my understanding of climate had drastically changed from what I was growing up with. It was more around ozone, greenhouse gases, all of that. And now at Rain Matter, we talk about getting place ownership for people, building more vibrant ecosystems, right? And how climate is beyond just carbon and temperature and more around the intersections of climate. So a lot of my understanding of climate started to change, right? And at the same time, I started working with the investments team as well. They also were doing investments in climate. So it gave me like a holistic perspective of what today is being called climate finance, where we were trying to find the best solution. So while we started doing grants in 2020 to nonprofits working in climate, we realized that there's a large gap that needs to be addressed through the for-profit world or the startup world, because a lot of innovation was happening there. So to play a complementary role, Rain Matter Investments started doing investments in climate as well, right? I happened to become the bridge between both worlds. So I got exposed to both ecosystems, one on the grant making side and then on the investment side. But that was sort of the journey of how all of this came together.
I think that's very interesting, right? Where like grant making became your first touch point to working in climate, but for a lot of people, like, and again, like you said, it's not just about carbon dioxide and temperatures, but it's like a lot more than that. I think everybody's introduction to climate change in itself is like, oh, rising temperature and this heat, global warming and everything. Like even if you see we have a climate, like a climate clock in IMB, right when you enter. So it says how many years more to go, like for another 1.5 degrees increase. So all this is something that's a very like a introductory, or that's what like climate faces. I mean, climate change is represented as to a lot of outside people. But to enter into climate change, what do you think they should know about or learn about? Have you had a proper like a learning experience that you took up, or was it something that you just picked up on your own with your work ex?
I think it's something you just pick up on the way. Um, yes, for people who are getting into the space, there are courses like there are a lot, stuff like that. But there's also now, I think, a larger gap in school curriculums and colleges to teach more around climate. And even if you look at any level of material that's available for college students, still is around carbon, not particularly carbon dioxide, but like carbon and temperature being a large, it's very doom and gloom, right? But why we think differently is more around places. And so the core philosophy of Rain Matter Foundation, right, is three core principles that guide us. One is that we want to promote decentralized production and consumption. Is that can we sort of urge people to eat what they grow, right? Two is to have a biodiversity lens to everything that we do. We're trying to solve for the planet, but we're not putting planet at the forefront of everything that we do, right? And third and most crucial piece is around places, having a place-based lens. When we think of climate, it's often thought of somebody else's problem, right? We're not going to get anywhere closer to solving this problem if we don't think of it as our own, right? So that has sort of been the learnings that have come through. But when I think back to how my understanding of climate pre-Rain Man Foundation to post it, it's changed a lot. It's become a lot more centered around what can we do, right? And we often say the big push for us is how do we get people to make better trade-offs. If you're taking the metro to work instead of driving to work, it's a better trade-off, right? If you're eating from food that is grown 200 kilometers around you, it's a better trade-off. So how do we get people to make those better trade-offs is what the sort of push and urge for us is. There isn't one particular book or guide that I read that prepared me for climate. In fact, when I joined Rain Matter, I was like, hey, is there a book that I can read then sort of educate me around climate? But no, it's something you just pick up on the job. But you need more people to start making that step towards discovery of wanting to work in climate.
I think similar to knowledge gap, right? There's also a lot of talent gap. So there's a lot of climate problems to work on, but not really, people don't really know how to work in a climate sector or how to build skills that can equip them to be a part of, something that make a positive impact on climate change. So how do you think that can be addressed, that talent gap?
So I'm currently working on that. That's my new project, beyond investing and beyond grants. It's something I picked up over the last month and a half. And this is the pain point that I personally had, right? Like from the day I met that guy at the wedding to me working at Rain Matter, it was a good 8 years. We all can't keep waiting for serendipity to happen to all of us, right? So we need to sort of accelerate this process. So that's what my current problem statement is. My assumption is that a lot of folks want to work in climate, but they're not doing so because of lack of knowledge of opportunities and pathways. And that's where we met. Is one piece of it is hosting offline events. It's not that there aren't enough climate events happening in Bangalore. In fact, NSRCL also organizes a lot of them. But I think what a gap that I noticed was happening in events in climate especially was they were all gatekept around networks and cost. Right? It was either where you were working, which is why you got access to these networks. And two is you have the climate parties of the world and the terrariums doing some exceptional work, but they can't help but charge you an 850 cover price, right? So I was like, as Rain Matter, can I make it more equitable? Like remove those entry barriers. You need those low touch points, right? A young college kid who can't afford to pay for a course or doesn't have those networks, where does he or she come to discover climate, right? There is a curiosity, but you need to play to that curiosity, right? And that's why I started the Climate Connect events, where I was trying to now engage with young people to see how do we get them excited about wanting to work in climate. Second piece is, similarly, I'm also starting my own podcast around climate careers, because you need those pathways to become a lot more visible to people, right? When you say you want to work in climate, it's a very large umbrella. What does that even mean? What does the journey look like? A climate tech founder's journey is very different from somebody who's working at a climate VC to somebody who's working at a non-profit working in climate. What do some of these journeys look like, right? Needs to become public. And lastly, I'm trying to build my little small effort to bridge the knowledge gap. So I'm doing an exercise to map the entire climate ecosystem to make this information available publicly to everybody. As a young person wanting to work in climate, or a person who's just curious, young, old, mid-career, doesn't matter, but somebody who's just curious, for them to discover who's working in it, there needs to be some level of discoverability that should exist, right? The startup ecosystem is a lot more mature. So you know who's doing what. You know for Zerodha. But you don't necessarily know about a Rainmatter Foundation, right? How do you discover a Rainmatter Foundation? How do you discover what NSR Sir is doing? How do you discover what a Terra.do is doing? Is what I'm trying to bridge, right? Because my hypothesis and my claim is that we don't have time or effort to not engage with these people who are climate curious, right? Because climate is not a you and me problem, it's an everyone problem. So we need as many hands on deck as possible. So that's been my thesis around climate talent.
I think that's very inspiring, right? And like good luck to all your efforts, and I hope it really becomes like super successful, because I can see the kind of impact that you would be creating on people, especially for a lot of young entrepreneurs or like young professionals who are just graduating. For them, climate and the whole climate change topic and the entirety of sustainability in itself has been a very far-fetched understanding topic. It's something that I learned in my science textbook, or it's something that I see people speaking on YouTube, but it's not something that I perceive as something that I will be working on. So I think that particular knowledge that you would be able to map out, and all the even the podcasts that you'd be talking about, I think that'll majorly bridge the gap between the far-fetched idea and like the small spark of wanting to work in climate. And like just like quickly maybe brief a little for our audience as well, right? So what do you think are the top skills that they could pick up, or something that they can do to start working in climate?
So in all honesty, right, while I'm trying to solve for this, I talk to a lot of people wanting to break into climate. And this is something a lot of people keep asking me, saying, what is the skill gap? What do I need to have to get into climate? Because also there is a perceived complexity of wanting to work in climate. A lot of skills, honestly, are transferable, right? Every climate tech startup has sort of just similar requirements to a regular startup, right? In operations. Yes, there's some technical abilities that you can sort of build on. So there's certifications to maybe be like auditors. ESG consulting is becoming a big piece. So a lot of these have those certifications, but they don't necessarily become the only reason to not break into climate. Given how young the ecosystem is, just the ability to go and reach out and see what opportunities are available is a good starting point, right? Your existing skills can actually be retrofitted into climate, not just with climatic startups, but also with non-profits working in it. It's just the willingness to do so. Telling yourself that you don't have the skills today and that's why you shouldn't break into it holds you back. So I often tell people, you take the step, no? You give me an imagination of what you think contributing in climate can look like for you. Then I'll tell you if there are opportunities that exist. Without that imagination of it, with the perception that maybe it's complex and my skill sets don't fit in, that can hold you back. Right? I don't have the skills naturally to work in climate. I'm a lawyer who's done random things in life. Right? So there is hope.
From climate, moving to impact investing, right? What's the biggest misconception of impact investing? And even before we get to impact investing, can you like quickly, like in 2 lines, explain the crux of impact investing?
The word impact investing is sort of overdone, but I think Rainmatter is an interesting case in all of this. We think of ourselves as more of a perpetual fund. Um, Also because we don't have LPs, so we're investing our own money. So we are looking to support startups that have long gestation periods. Folks who need more time to build out what they want with patient capital. That's been our thesis, right? As compared to a lot of other impact funds, they're more focused around balancing both, like trying to back social entrepreneurs who have a very deep-rooted problem statement that is core to all of us, but are also a business in its sense. Like it's not more around profitability. That's not the focus, but the focus is more around impact metrics, where how much good are you really doing with the work that you're, with the startup that you're building.
So, what's the biggest misconception about impact investing?
So the bigger misconception is, and this might be a little controversial, but most impact funds say their impact first, but they all want a 35% IRR, which I can't completely blame them. While Rainmatter has the luxury of investing our own money, a lot of other funds have obligations to their LPs that they can't do it with as much luxury. But my hope, and I can only hope, that a lot of funds, while having impact as the first metric, don't really look for returns. Um, if they do get returns, it's a plus. But I still feel there are some impact funds that don't really chase returns and are actually chasing impact. So very exciting to see how the space grows.
We always hear that, climate is the future. So, what industries within it excite you the most as an investor?
I get scared when I call myself an investor because I'm like, I don't know if I'm a dictate on what some of the sectors are, but so if you think of how we have invested in the space as Rainmatter over the last 2 years, it's less been around climate tech. It's been about climate solutions that are good for us, right? So we consider Akshay Kalpa a climate investment, right? Because what Shashi from Akshay Kalpa did or is doing is trying to create more farms and less is less around it being just an organic milk company. There's so much more. He's trying to build a farming collective and sort of amplify the impact across, right? So that's an interesting case. Alt materials is again very exciting to see what can happen and come from that. I don't know if I'm necessarily bullish on carbon sequestration. While it has amazing use cases, in a country like India, it's just too expensive for it to be a viable enough solution. But yeah, the agri-tech space is doing some interesting work. You have materials getting better. You have biopolymers that I'm really excited about. But yeah, there are a lot of applications where as long as the heart of it is innovation and they're trying to do things better, both for us and for the planet, is what I'm really bullish on, right? And in fact, we have one portfolio company that's doing very interesting work around bamboo, right? So alt materials don't necessarily have to be only biopolymers, but also can be bamboo, and building out an ecosystem for them, right? And I oftentimes try and tell startups this, but it's, at least in my previous avatar when I used to engage with them actively, what I would try and tell them is, hey, think ecosystem level building and not individuals, because climate as a sector, especially in the startup ecosystem, is still very young. A lot of pieces of the larger ecosystem still need to be built. So it cannot be done by one startup or two startups. It has to be a collected, concerted effort by everybody. So for any young founders who are looking to build in climate, I would say have that lens. Yes, have a solutions lens to it, but like deeply understand the problem statement that you're trying to chase and think of it less as an individual chase and as a more collective effort.
I think that's quite a great takeaway, right, for all our aspiring entrepreneurs out there who are watching this. And like as a follow-up question to this as well, from a perspective of a climate founder, Do you think they should take up like a VC fund or another funding structure? Or what's your take on it?
So the conventional VC structure doesn't necessarily always work in climate. VCs have limited time. They have 7-year fund cycles, maybe 10 in the best case scenario. And it takes longer time than that to build some of these climate tech solutions, right? You can't expect returns from some of these solutions in shorter periods of time. But I don't think we're in a place to even prescribe either or, right? Because today the capital that's available is venture. Um, Capital like Rainmatter is still lesser, and the number of startups that we can support also is a fewer. I personal belief think that there's a role for even larger grants to kick in, because I think a big gap, especially in climate, and I think that learning came from my time here in IMB when I would spend time with the startups in NSR cell, would come from the fact that everybody would tell me that because I work on the grant side of things, we need to figure out how to give tech innovation grants. Because this technological readiness level is something that most startups struggle with. VCs don't want to touch them till they get to TRL level 5 and above. So startups struggle to even get till there. So there is a need for some level of catalytic funding that needs to come in. Maybe through philanthropies, through, if CSR could enable some of that money, it would be exponential, right? Because I have said this enough that CSR is a huge untapped space that really needs to be explored. We think of CSR today as, in a very limited sense, the access is exponential. That we need to move beyond just planting trees to actually supporting solutions and innovations that are happening.
Yeah, I think I quite agree with. If you see a lot of corporate CSR actual funding is allocated on a very basic level where they could do so much more with the budget that they have in place. So I think that is something I totally agree with in your point. And like, okay, now moving again to like from a startup POV, right? And as an investor, what are some key indicators that an early climate stage startup is actually creating an impact and not just like looks good on the paper, but is actually right out there creating impact? What are some key top indicators?
I don't know if I'm best placed to give indicators per se, but I think people need to think through two aspects, right? One is impact first and what's best for the planet, but also how do you sustain yourself? And the piece around greenwashing that you're talking about, which can happen a lot, they won't last the test of time, right? They might build great businesses, but they'll get called out at some point, right? So companies that are trying to greenwash might have a limited time frame where they'll get the limelight, but they won't last for long enough. And it's only those that are creating solutions for the long term that will stand the test of time.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, these are most personal opinions, less investment focused indicators, because how each investor looks at a particular startup and the way they evaluate it will be completely different. This is purely my lens to it, because maybe I also come from a privileged place of working with a fund that is a lot more liberal, right? But if you have to give your money back to your LPs in 7 years, you can't think like I do. You can't say we'll have longer gestation periods. You want to see results, and you want to see results quick. This fail fast mentality that happens is so often seen, right? And the climate ecosystem in general is so young. We have to see it really mature, see some larger organizations come out of it. Then it'll sort of give way for a lot of younger folks to come in. But I think it's still very early days.
Do you think you can quote on record any companies that you personally invested, as Rainmatter over your last 2 years, and how do you think their story has improved, or what do you think how do you think they've grown so far? Something key takeaways that our entrepreneurs could learn from?
So not something that we've invested, and someone that I've recently interacted with that I got really excited about um, is a startup called Recube, based in Mumbai. So they're trying to decarbonize events, right? So the Coldplay event that happened in India, so it was called a very sustainable festival because they were doing everything that they could to make it more sustainable. So what Recube does like a carbon audit where it maps out and understands exactly what the footprint of the event will be, from having water coolers, um, so flying the band in, to the travel, to diesel generators, the overall impact, and then they come up with solutions to mitigate some of those, right? So from installing water coolers instead of giving plastic bottles, they do something around sunscreen machines, an EV fleet for the band to travel, um, and some very quirky, interesting stuff, right? So they also make these cups made out of bagas, these reusable cups made out of bagas, which now they've added a quirky twist on it and interesting branding. So it's become like a fashion accessory, right? So for me, when I look at a startup like that, it's exciting because events are not going to die out, right? We are continued, and I think live events are having a larger moment than they've ever had in the history of India. And if we can help decarbonize some of those events and lower their footprint, nothing like it. So for me, it's journeys like these that I get really excited about. It's the mainstream, but you're trying to embed a climate lens into it, right? So for any young people looking to build, those are the kind of solutions you want to think about.
I think we've learned a lot from this segment, right? Of climate, impact investing, transitioning into different careers and learning out of your experimentation and picking up skills of resilience. I think it was very information packed with your personal stories and storytelling aspect of it. Now, moving on to our last, like a more fun aspect of the entire podcast, right? So we have fun rapid fire questions. You can't take much time to think about it. It needs to be back on back answers. Yeah. Let's go. One job you'd be terrible at.
I think all jobs. I think I
You
just
need to
stuck.
pick one.
I think I just stuck in doing jobs.
Let's pick one. What would be one thing that you're like, shit, no, nah, that's something that I cannot do.
Lawyer.
Worst career advice you've ever received.
Tough shit. Everybody hates their job. Just suck it up and stick to it.
Okay. If not in climate space, what completely different field would you be in?
I'll be running my own bar and restaurant.
Interesting. What's a book or podcast that genuinely changed the way you think, apart from the TED Talks that you mentioned? What's one book or podcast?
So one podcast that changed my life is Joe Rogan and Naval Ravikant. So Naval Ravikant has sort of been like my online mentor. So I've lived my life based on his principles. So definitely Naval's podcast. Tim Ferriss had a huge role to play in my life and everything that he wrote about. So I started reading his 4-hour work week and those series, which were really inspiring. TED Talks beyond. So Emily also has a book that she's written saying how to do everything,
Okay.
which is based on the TED Talk, which is also a very good read. But yeah, I'm also not somebody who actively reads. I don't read books to completion. I pick up books for inspiration and then I go down a different rabbit hole. So I thought I was crazy for the longest time. Then I realized there are others out there who do similar things.
Naval Ravikant does the same thing. Yeah, he picks up books to inspire, and he does not say, "Hey, it's not mandatory that you got to complete the book.
Yeah.
It's for you to pick up lessons." Once you're done, you're good to go. You can read multiple books at a time. I think that was comforting, at least for me. I was like, okay, cool. That is, validating it to some level. I think for Naval Ravikant, Joe Rogan's podcast is everybody's first, like the mind-blowing aspect of, whoa, okay, now I need to follow him.
So Tim Ferriss was my introduction to Naval.
Oh, okay.
He first did a podcast with Naval, and then I saw the Joe Rogan version of it. And I feel like those anecdotes for me are, and also Naval has his own podcast.
Yeah, he does.
So yeah, that was great. And they've been like different influencers in my life, mostly online, because I spend so much time on the internet that you got some words of wisdom from somewhere and you're just like, hey, this is great. This goes back to even like, I did an email to Ankur Bariku around the three aspects that I mentioned earlier around money, time, and myself. That piece I'd actually written to him saying one day I'll be on a stage somewhere and I'll quote you as my early influences in life. And so I wrote an email with the title, A Few Good Words Didn't Hurt Anybody. Few kind words didn't hurt anybody.
Damn. I think that is really good. Maybe I should go back to this thing and read upon what you'd written. That's very interesting. Okay. Now for the closing and takeaway. If you had to give one real advice for students who are trying to build a meaningful career, what would it be?
Just stay curious and be relentless and be shameless. Just be in people's faces. There is no other anecdote to it. Like you can't keep waiting for the right opportunity to come your way. You just need to put yourself out there and I think this is oversaid, but you should go and grab those opportunities.
I think it's also the most important and totally worth repeating those lines, because that is something only when you see what impact it had on just being shameless and asking for the opportunity that you'll really understand the value or the outcome that you get out of it. Thank you so much for coming to our podcast. It was great hosting you. I think I related and resonated with you on so many levels, and I think I've also learned so much out of your journey of resilience into the whole career phase of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.